Since I started making my crappy little games, I have been using Unity. This is fine, but it is very complex. I use maybe 1 to 5% of the features inside of Unity, so what if I use something simpler? Much simpler. Meet Pico-8, a fantasy console, essentially an emulator for a games console that has never existed. Inside of it is a console, a browser for playing others' creations, and a fully functioning game engine. The engine is incredibly limited, maxing out at only 8 kilobytes of code, 256 8x8 sprites, and 128 by 32 map cells. All of your programming, art, sound, and music design is done in the console within these limits. Great, so let's get started. One of the first things I noticed when I was following tutorials in Pico-8 was the amount of manual things you have to do in the code, which is Lua with an API. For example, things you take for granted in an engine like Unity is rendering the game objects. It's not very hard to do in Pico-8, but you have to keep in mind that you need to write the code that renders the player's sprites, map, and any other visual effects in the draw function, the last bit of code that is run each frame. The next thing I noticed is, despite an amazing community and a subreddit that is very helpful, there isn't an abundance of tutorials to follow, with a few series for top-down and platformer games, and a few other long-form devlog style tutorials that guide you through every step of someone else's game, something that I find hard to follow. Either way, I got started by following the series by Nerdy Teachers, as well as the series by Dylan Bennett, which gave me a good fitting on how the engine works. The next step on learning Pico-8 was making my own little game, so I decided to enter this game jam with just 8 hours to go, and in the last 6 or so hours managed to scrounge up this monstrosity of a game. With rather pathetic gameplay, I was relying on some charming narrative to pull things together, but that really wasn't the case. Either way, you live and learn. So my final challenge was making an actual game, something that I'm actually somewhat proud of, so I got to work. This time on a platformer. I wrote some new code that has variables for the player's position in X and Y, as well as the rate at which they are changing, dx and dy. You can modify dx and dy and use this code to make it update X and Y, which is the position of the player. You can then call the X and Y position, as well as the sprite, to draw it in the camera's view where it's supposed to. I also had to write, or copy and paste, some new code for collisions, since that works differently with this method, as well as for animations, interactions, and button presses, because that works weird apparently, as well as the way the camera follows the player and the way the player interacts with things and displays text on the screen. I will put the resources that I remember using in the description so you too can become experts in copying and pasting. As a quick side note, while there isn't actually that many tutorials and other resources about Pico-8, at least compared to Unity, the subreddit is incredibly useful and welcoming to any issues that you can't seem to answer yourself. I rate it a 10 out of 10 non-toxic community, and I say fuck you to Stack Overflow. Anyway, I had made a game, spent a few hours sketching and prototyping some levels. They're not all good, but there's a few I really like. I love this one, having to grip onto these sides, jumping off them before falling into the spikes. It takes some nice precise button presses and timing and can be approached in a few different ways. On the contrary, this level is utter shite, but I was out of ideas. Sorry folks. Have fun running into these for a few minutes. I had also gone through a few iterations for the art style and ended up using this. I like how the player, NPCs, ground and background are all distinct from one another, and I think it's a good use of the very limited Pico-8 palette. I had also written some characters for the game in a short story. I struggled to make my interaction system display more than one screen of text at a time, so they're all limited to that, and I'm sure there are creative ways to either overcome this problem or creative ways to use this problem to tell some unique stories, but I didn't have any creativity left, so I did what I could with what I had. At the end of the day, I've made something that I'm genuinely really proud of here. I think I've made a unique and fun game in a pretty short amount of time. In fact, I'm really more proud of this game than I have been of the one I've been working on for 3 months, which is making me question my choices with that one. Either way, I've learnt a whole lot about Pico-8 development, and I'm sure that I will use it for future projects and game jams, as well as making a couple short games that I'm pretty pleased with, and I completely recommend picking it up. It's made by one guy, I'm pretty sure, so, you know, I guess that's a plus, is it? Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then subscribing would be super appreciated. If not, then, I don't know, dislike the video or something. It's not like anyone will know anymore.